carriers in terms of their service.
The Biden administration working till the end of the term, aren't they?
They are. They're taking it down to the bitter end. All right, folks, do not go anywhere. We're coming back on Bloomberg Business Week.
It's 3:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got 39 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell. Stocks trading at or near session highs right now. Big day for stocks. CPI Wednesday, bank earnings, all of that helping fuel gains. Right to the numbers with the S&P now up 115 points, an advance of 2%. Year to date now, we got the S&P up by 1.3%. The Dow up 770, up by 1.8%. The Nasdaq Composite Index up 497, up 2.6%. 10-year yield 4.65%. The 2-year 4.26%. Spot gold up $18 the ounce, $26.95 now, up 0.7%. And West Texas Intermediate crude oil rallying 3.9%, $80.53 for a barrel of WTI. Bitcoin back above $100,000. Bitcoin now surging 4.4%. Bitcoin at 100,680. Inauguration day Monday. Carol Schleif, Chief Market Strategist at BMO Private Wealth, told us she is bracing for a busy week ahead.
It's important to remember it's not just tariffs. There's a whole bunch of policies. The interesting thing is is having markets closed on Monday, and I suspect there's going to be a lot of announcements out on Monday. So it's really a buckle up and get ready for what comes in the next week or so.
And indeed, we got you covered here at Bloomberg. Carol Schleif, Chief Market Strategist at BMO Private Wealth. Bank stocks pushing higher after earnings. Case in point, JP Morgan Chase up 2.3%. Citigroup surging 7.4%. Wells Fargo up 7%. Goldman up 6.1%. And tomorrow morning, we will be hearing from Bank of America and Morgan Stanley. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, as you mentioned, stocks pretty much holding on to their best levels of the session. We've had a lot of news today, including just a little bit over a couple of hours ago, Israel and Hamas agreeing to a ceasefire deal that will release dozens of hostages and bring a temporary halt to the war in the Gaza Strip that has killed tens of thousands of people in the last 15 months and touched off broader turmoil across the Middle East region. Tim.
Qatari and U.S. officials both confirming that the ceasefire will start Sunday in the last 6 weeks. President Biden speaking from the White House just about an hour ago. We took that live about the ceasefire and the role that the U.S. played. With an update on the story, we got Bloomberg News senior editor Ramsey Al-Rakabi joining us from Washington, D.C. Ramsey, I'm going to ask you the same question I've been asking myself and everybody who will take my questions today. Is this finally the beginning of the end of this war?
Well, I'm asking myself that question too. It's a very key point. They just before we even get into whether or not there's a long-term solution here, I just want to flag that Netanyahu's office earlier today said that there's still some details to be hammered out. Even though the U.S. went ahead and announced it, as you mentioned, Biden held a little speech today going through some details, and the Qataris said there's a deal. Even Netanyahu's office has said that there's still details that need to be done, and the Israeli president has urged the cabinet to approve the deal. In addition to that, his government colleagues, particularly the finance minister, Smotrich, has come out and said that this deal is bad and dangerous. Now, to your question about whether or not it will be the end of the fighting, that's far from clear. Even if it does get passed, it's basically a 6-week pause in which 33 hostages are supposed to be released. An unclear number of Palestinians will be released. The second phase after that is something that is still to be seen. It would involve a longer-term negotiation, or sorry, a longer-term agreement to be negotiated between Israel and whoever would be represented by the Palestinians. Israel has, as I'm sure you know, has committed to destroying Hamas. And earlier today, as mentioned, the finance minister in Israel said that he expects the war to continue after this pause to root out Hamas entirely. So, you know, it's obviously a very important step, but there's still a lot of ground to still cover, and it seems very far away from an actual peace agreement.
Yeah, and we did have some of those headlines at 2:30 about the Israeli president calling on ministers to approve the hostage deal. I am curious, Ramsey, as I'm listening to you about Prime Minister Netanyahu saying that, you know, there's still some things to be done. Did President Biden, did the U.S. team kind of jump the gun here?
That's a great question, and our colleagues are still looking into that. Just from what we've seen today, as I'm sure as you see as well, it was a bit of a fast-moving and slightly confusing sequence of events. Keep in mind, you know, since the last ceasefire they had in November, there have been several close calls. The U.S. has said several times an agreement is very close, and either Israel says Hamas reneged on something, or Hamas says Israel added new conditions. So it has always been a very fast-moving and delicate target to get this over the line. It's interesting you mentioned Biden jumping the gun. Obviously, his people were involved in this. He, speaking today, said that there was a lot of intense negotiation and engagement on his part. Keep in mind that President-elect Donald Trump is also taking credit for what happened. He put out a statement shortly after saying the hostages will come home, and he credited it to his victory and the work that he and his envoy have been doing in the Middle East. As my colleague Ethan Bronner in Israel reported today, Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff had interrupted Netanyahu's observance of the Sabbath to deal a very blunt message to him, saying the incoming president wants a deal done before his inauguration. So, if Biden might have gone too early, or the Qataris, Trump also is going out ahead and saying this deal is done. But as we all know, all eyes are on Israel to see what his cabinet does.
All right, Ramsey, really appreciate you joining us on this fast-moving story. That's Bloomberg News senior editor Ramsey Al-Rikabi joining us from Washington. Well, President Biden tonight, Carol, will likely make this part of his farewell address. He'll probably mention it. He'll also likely take a victory lap when it comes to the economy.
Yeah, and probably a good reason. Remember the jobs report that we just got on the economy. Some news, too, in the world of AI. New York will be the first state to require notifications by businesses of AI-related job losses under an executive action that Governor Kathy Hochul, announced last night in her State of the State address. The governor touting the potential economic benefits from the technology while resisting efforts by state lawmakers to impose restrictions aimed at preventing possible abuses. I'm thinking our next guest might have some thoughts on all of this.
Yeah, Dan Shapiro is COO of LinkedIn. He joins us from Sunnyvale, California. Dan, you over at LinkedIn have got a new report out about how AI is changing the way that we work. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. But before we get there, at LinkedIn, you've got a great view on the economy, specifically on the job market, who's hiring, who's not hiring. What are you seeing? How would you characterize it?
Well, we're coming off of a roller coaster of a labor market over the last few years. Right after COVID, you saw one of the tightest labor markets that any of us can remember. And as interest rates rose, that led to deceleration. We're now in a much more stable place, but it is by no means as tight and competitive as it was just a few years ago. So I think by historical standards, the labor market is healthy and the jobs market. But, it is very much a reset from the environment that we felt, just back in 2022.
Any interesting nuances in terms of today's jobs market that that shows just some changes and maybe some lasting changes starting to happen?
Sure. Well, one of the stats that I think is most interesting is if you look at the jobs today in the U.S., 20% of the roles are with titles that didn't exist in the year 2000. And so it's just a reminder of how fluid the labor market can be, particularly when you're talking about new technology. Some of the roles are related to AI, security, sustainability. And so things are always changing. What's unique about the environment we're in right now is that if you look forward, the idea is that AI is going to change how just about every job gets done. In the past, when we've had new technologies, they'll change some roles, but whether you're a marketer, you're in finance, you're a salesperson, you're a lawyer, AI in some way is going to change how you do your work on a day-to-day basis. So one way to think about it is, although, your title may not change, for sure your job is going to change.
How is your job going to change? That's what I'm still trying to figure out. We have some really cool, we've been doing AI at Bloomberg for years. We have some really cool AI features on the Bloomberg terminal. But I'm using those to the extent that I get to read news really quickly with the help of Bloomberg automation. But my day-to-day work hasn't changed.
Well, it's still very early. And I think what most companies are facing this year is the shift from an environment of piloting new technologies to rolling them out at scale. That's really what 2025 is going to be about, is scaling the adoption of AI in different roles. But I'll give you a few examples. One of the products that we built at LinkedIn helps recruiters use AI to write automated, personalized messages to candidates. It takes a lot of time to write a personalized message, but it makes a big difference to whether people reply or not. And because AI understands a bit about the candidate and the job that they're hiring for, AI-generated messages get 40% higher response rates. And so that's a very specific, tangible example where recruiters' days are now using AI to change how they do what they've done for a long period of time, which is communicate with candidates. And ultimately, what they're able to do as a result of that is spend more time with candidates that really allow them to build human-to-human connection. So I think it's an example of where the tactics of how jobs get done change, even if the job overall has not changed.
How do you think it's going to change what kids study in school and college in particular?
I think it's going to change a lot. I think that AI makes it much easier in the way that the internet did, but maybe in a much larger way to access information and to synthesize information. So I think schools are going to work through a period of time where teaching kids how to use AI to be more effective in their studies and how to do that in the way where people are still learning skills is going to be a big topic of conversation. You know, one of the ways that employers are talking about this is how do I really know what someone knows in an interview process? You know, if they can go to a tool and generate a resume that looks perfect, that may or may not be the clearest signal anymore to whether they can do the job. So how do I assess them in a more in-person way where I can see the difference between what the AI contributed and what the person contributed?
I'm seriously concerned.
I think that,
well, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think ultimately the most interesting job question of 2025 will continue to be, tell me an example of how you used AI to do your job, because employers want professionals that are comfortable with AI. They see it as one of the important change management efforts they're going to have to go through, and so comfort with AI is a very critical skill.
I used it for my chicken marinade recipe.
I was just going to say, yeah, I was like, I got to make dinner tonight. Like, what am I going to do?
You know what? Then
we would not do well.
Really good lunch at work, so that's how I use it to make my, job.
However, if we were in a interview, it might not go over so well.
It might not go over so well. Hey, I do the interviewing here, okay?
I know.
Hey, Dan, before we let you go, this school thing really freaks me out as the parent of young kids. I mean, you could go to one of these LLMs and type in, just in the last 30 seconds we have, type in, a term paper prompt. How do you control for that?
I do think that the way that schools give homework, the way that they assess competence, it's really going to have to change, both in terms of being able to understand what people really know, but also how to teach our students how to use AI to do things more effectively. Like in a job market where knowing how to use AI is one of the core skills, we need an education system that embraces AI while understanding how it changes how perhaps you really understand skills.
Yeah, it's like not the same of, okay, all of a sudden you have a calculator, to do like the Algebra 2 trig test. Like, I don't think it's the same as having that.
No, it's totally
on
different.
Your test. It's so much more.
Yeah.
Or so it feels
I'm
that
more
way.
concerned about homework than tests.
Yeah.
Because, like, you can't have a phone during tests, right?
No. A phone?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
I don't know.
All right.
Like, I know the answer to that.
TBD. Dan Shapiro, thank you so much, COO over at LinkedIn. Coming up next, we drive to the close on this Wednesday.
It's 3:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Lots of moving parts to this market. We have got stocks holding very close to session highs. We head over to the first word breaking news desk for today's afternoon call. Here he is, Bill Maloney.
And good afternoon, Charlie. U.S. stocks with an aggressive bid after the consumer price index rose less than expected. Dow's currently up 739 points. S&Ps are higher by 1.9%, and NASDAQ, that gains by 2.5%. The U.S. 10-year yield fell to 4.66. Gold and oil are in the green, and Bitcoin, that's back above 100,000. Among the main 11 S&P sectors, only consumer staples were in the red, and leaders to the upside in the Dow, Goldman Sachs and American Express, while Coca-Cola led to the downside. After earnings, Wells Fargo and Citigroup both jumped 7%. And in deal news, QXO offered to buy Beacon Roofing for $124 a share. Wrapping things up, H.B. Fuller reports after the bell. Live from the first breaking news desk, I'm Bill Maloney. Charlie?
Okay, we thank you very much, Bill Maloney, to hear live breaking news over your Bloomberg. Type squawk SQUA on your Bloomberg terminal. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm driving in my car.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no. This is not a toy.
Who's gonna drive you home?
Honey, please, I'll do the driving.
Drive on.
Excuse me, I want to drive.
It's
the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody, we've got just about 18 minutes left in today's trading session, and we definitely have a rally underway, just rolling over the best levels of the session, but nonetheless up about 2%, as you heard from Charlie and Bill Maloney, up about 2% on the S&P 500, 1.7% higher on the Dow Jones Industrial Average, and you're looking at the NASDAQ 100 really outperforming a gain of 2.4%, but most names, Tim, if I look at the big cap index, are higher in today's session.
Hey, we got Rick Pitcairn with us, Chief Investment Officer of the Pitcairn Family Office. The family office is more than 100 years old. It traces its roots back to John Pitcairn, the co-founder of what today is called PPG Industries. It's the $27 billion market cap maker of paints, coatings, and specialty materials. The firm, Pitcairn Family Office, that is, has $9 billion in assets under management. We got Rick back with us here in the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. It's been almost 2 years since we've seen you. Welcome back. How are you?
Great. How are you guys? Good to be here.
We're doing pretty well. Hey, I went through all that history, but there's a lot more history. Can the family assets are still a big part of the Pitcairn Family Office, but the growth that you've seen outside of the actual family has been pretty big. Give us some context on where you are today, what's part of the family assets, what's outside the family, who are the other families involved in the family office, that sort of thing?
Well, the vast majority of what we do is with other families. You know, our family's been the core family, and we still have a meaningful amount of that $9 billion that we serve. But we serve 100 families. We serve 27 single-family offices. And really what we're trying to do is just bring, the multi-generational perspective that we have, how to make that wealth last, how to actually have a family that stays cohesive and moves that money across the generations. And in today's world, as decisions get quicker and quicker and everything goes faster and faster, I think people are really resonating with that idea of how to step back and give it some thought and do it in a little different way.
I feel like the roots of your company, whether it was the glass market, whether it was manufacturing, whether it was chemicals, whether it was sugar, some of kind of those basic core industries, if you will. When you look at the investment environment today, where certainly financial investments have gotten so much more sophisticated. We talk about AI, technology, and so much more. What's interesting to you guys? Where do you see the opportunities?
Well, we've always seen the opportunity in equity and growth, and it couldn't be a more exciting time for markets right now. There's obviously a lot of pitfalls out there, but I'll tell you, even when you look back to my great-grandfather, and you say, well, it was just sort of glass and these industrial materials. They were really the private equity guys of the day. He was running with Rockefeller. He was running with Carnegie. They were young. They got an immense amount of wealth by taking market share, not unlike these tech entrepreneurs we see today. And so it's sort of, to me, just a promise of the recycle of this idea of building capital and taking ideas and what we do in America the best, which is innovation, and we're in the middle of a great innovative phase right now, which is really cool, and we're trying to bring the best of that to our clients.
So how do you put the money to work and make sure that you're taking advantage of that?
Well, we're a manager, so we don't pick stocks ourselves. We find the best managers in the world to do that. And so what we're really trying to do is find a mix of these managers and styles and strategies so that if you have this large family enterprise across these generations, that you take advantage of this incredible bull market that we've had for the last 2 years, maybe 3, depending on what this year does. But do it in a way to where you have some guardrails and protection so that you sort of get away from those impulses to jump away from a scary market, because the one thing that's consistent about our client base is they all pay taxes at a very high rate. And if you don't bring taxes into that investment discussion, you're making a big mistake. So that says to us, be strategic, have some things in the portfolio that are there for a rainy day, but make sure that the foundation is growth oriented.
All right, so these are big, broad, macro, themes and ideas that you're talking about. Can you drill down? I am really curious about, so when you've got, a high net worth family who comes and wants to put the money to work for a longer term and are thinking about, preserving what they've got and growing that, but, at a maybe certain level of risk, but they don't want to lose even, their initial amount of money that they're bringing to you. Where do you put it, though? Like, is it, the AI theme that we talk about, is that opportunities?
Absolutely. You would have large cap growth managers on both the public side, and then you have private capital every asset class that you hear people come in here and talk about and saying that we're doing this in wealth management, usually our clients would have some sector of that, some chunk. Now, most of our clients, it's rare that they show up with $200 million in a bucket and say, here, manage my money.
How do they show up then?
They would show up with an operating business, or perhaps an existing structure where they had a bunch of private investments. And so our job is going to be to see where their risk is, where their exposure is, how to round that out in a way that they're prepared for whatever environments are going to come.
What are the other services that you offer apart from finding managers to deploy capital to? Are you helping with the nitty-gritty of estate planning, those sorts of things?
100%. We started back in the day handling every aspect for the Pitcairn family. And so our DNA is to be very comprehensive. As we've evolved, many times we'll just take a slice of that. A family will come to us and say, we really need to support our next gen households and we need investments. And the next will come along and say, they need something else. But I was working with a family last week in Florida. They need everything. They need household support, bill pay, insurance, investments.
Prenuptial agreements for the kids who are getting married?
We wouldn't write them, but we'd advise on them.
Okay. Those sorts of things.
What would you say about in a, environment where we talk about K-shaped recovery? Some people, a part of the U.S. society, are doing really, really well. And we talk about wealth creation. For those that are wealthy, it has just taken off even more over the last couple of years. But not everybody is seeing that kind of wealth. Those gaps are never good for society. So, how do you think about wealth creation kind of reaching more of Americans?
We believe that really families and family businesses do more for employment and do more throughout the spectrum of the American society. And not only that, we really work hard on the philanthropic side for our businesses. So we have a lot of families who are really committed to different philanthropic missions, and whether we're running the foundations or advising them on how to structure their assets so that they can fulfill that goal. It's family by family decision. We can't decide for the families how they want to pursue that. But there's very few families that don't have some desires along those lines.
Well, how would you generalize the type of support that they like to give? Like, what are the themes that sort of bind them together?
So maybe they have a foundation that they want to know how long that foundation can last. We want to support these two entities and would like to support a third, but we want to know the ramifications behind that. Maybe that foundation has been run by a large bank or another institution. Is that the right place to have it? Do we want to diversify? So we're going to do all that, and then we're also going to do a lot of the actual blocking and tackling if they need that administration around that foundation as well.
Rick, just got about 20 seconds left here. You guys have managed money for a long time through bear markets, bull markets. Any signs out there that things are getting a little rich and a little worrisome, just quickly?
Well, valuations are high. I don't think the third year of a bull market is always a tough market. And you got to realize that, our debt situation, we're spending 7% of GDP with a full employment, and look at this stock market today.
Yeah, there's a little disconnect there.
And we have AI on the other side. So let's stay diverse and win.
Rick, thank you so much. Rick Pitcairn, he's Chief Investment Officer of the Pitcairn Family Offices, joining us right here in studio. This is Bloomberg.
Listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Nasser and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
All right, everybody, we've got just under 7 minutes to go until we ring the closing bell on Wall Street on this Wednesday. Earnings underway. We got those big banks this morning, and that's certainly an outperformer in today's session, but we're going to look for any news after the closing bell because it's been a busy Wednesday.
Did you see this
part?
story
What?
that Elizabeth Sedrin, our producer, put into the chat about home values?
I did not see it, but I'm going to pull it up. Well, home values, New York City. Can I just tell you, folks, here at Bloomberg, when anything comes up about New York City real estate, like the whole team just jumps on it because we are like obsessed with stuff in New York City.
There's a reason that in the last hour, it's the 6th most read story on the Bloomberg terminal.
Yeah, exactly. Like everybody wants to know because it's kind of relates to most of us or a lot of us.
There's some interesting numbers in here.
Okay, what do you got?
Residential real estate is poised to lead a comeback in New York City property values amid a housing shortage and still high interest rates capping sales. I'm going to give you the numbers here, Carol, and then I'm going to give you the how do they know this question, okay? And you're going to tell me the answer, okay?
Uh-oh.
The market value of the city's more than 1 million properties is projected to rise by 5.7% to $1.6 trillion. That's in the upcoming fiscal year that begins on July 1st. This is according to a tentative assessment roll released by the Department of Finance Wednesday. Last year, values rose just 0.7%, reflecting the Federal Reserve's aggressive rate hikes.
Is this because retail or commercial?
I don't know why.
Well, you know, commercial properties, including offices, retail buildings, and hotels, are also showing some signs of recovery with a projected 3.8% increase in market value. So it's just the overall market going up.
But it might, at first blush, it kind of seems great for people who own property because if you own a co-op, a condo, or a rental building, a rental building.
Yeah.
It's always good news if you own a rental building in New York City. Market values are projected to rise 7.3%. The median rent for a one-bedroom apartment in New York rose 21% from February 2020 to September of 2024, according to the city's comptroller office.
I have a gift for you. Brooklyn is expected to lead with an estimated market value jump of 9.4% as rental apartment values in the borough climbed 15%.
But I believe
affordability issues again. Anyway,
correct me if I'm wrong here. If I'm reading this right, Carol.
Yeah.
This means that the taxes are going to go up
Yeah.
for people who own these properties.
I guess if they change hands, right?
Is it only if they change hands, or is it the real estate assessed value of the tax?
Is it every year? I know where I am. I wasn't reassessed for a long time, and then they reassessed, and it was like, whoa,
And they like
that
keep
hurt.
reassessing and reassessing.
Well, no, it depends. Like there's some nuances to the budget when it doesn't meet or needs extra money. But I don't know. Do New York City taxes get reassessed? Real estate taxes every year?
I think they just send a bill and people pay it because they have no choice. Real estate taxes are the biggest contributor to New York City's coffers. It provides almost 1/3 of the revenue for the $115 billion budget. Property taxes are also the primary source of funds backing the city's approximately $42 billion of general obligation bonds.
You know, I do think about that JP Morgan story about bringing people back to work. I mean, you've seen a number of Wall Street firms have moved to bring their workers back to the office 5 days a week in person. That's brought New York office visits to just 14%, below their pre-COVID levels in October, according to Placer AI estimates. So, yeah, it looks like things maybe have bottomed out. But what they said for office, it's really trophy office buildings that are leading the bounce in office property valuations.
A couple ways to think about values of property, right? One is that it's if you sell it, you got to move somewhere else. Okay.
Yeah,
that's
true.
one thing.
Right.
Two is my dad has always said something is worth only what someone will pay for it.
That's true.
So we had a discussion about alternative assets and liquidity. And, Zillow can say one thing about a property, or New York City can come out and say one thing about a property value. But if you can't find somebody willing to pay that value when you need to sell it, kind of doesn't matter.
Right. But this is interesting.
It is. Oh, it's very interesting.
Considering, I think there have been some concerns, or we've seen some of the numbers stuck for a little while, but scarcity certainly plays, I would say, into this as well. All right, folks, we are getting to wrap up on this Wednesday trading session. We've got stocks just rolling off their best levels of the session, but you're talking about almost 2% gains for both the S&P and the Dow, and you've got the NASDAQ 100 up by 2.3%. Do not go anywhere. We're counting you down at the close on this Wednesday. The closing bell starts right now.
And the 10-year yield is down 15 basis points.
The Closing Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close starts right now.
All right, about 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Matt Miller here with Vonnie Quinn, and we're going to help take you through the closing bell with a global simulcast. We're joined now by Carol Massar. It is my great honor to be joined by Carol Massar and Tim Stenivek, bringing together our Bloomberg television, radio, and YouTube audiences worldwide to parse through the most crucial moments after the open, of course, of the trading day.
Yeah, keeping us busy and on our toes today. I keep thinking about the big banks, Matt, and the outperformance there, just the blockbuster numbers. And, you take a look at the KBW Bank Index, it's up more than 4%, so outperforming the overall market. Looking forward to kind of the rest of the banks to kind of come out with their numbers.
Yeah, still waiting on Bank of America. We'll get that one tomorrow morning. When you talk crucial moments of the day, I mean, it was before the market opened. It was when that CPI report came out, Vonnie, I think. Look no further than Bitcoin.
Really?
Yeah, I did it. I did it.
Mm-hmm.
Hit $100,000 once again. Finally, back up there. 99,500 per Bitcoin right now.
Problem is, you probably mentioned it on air. I did too, and then it dipped back below $100,000. So we jinxed the Bitcoin community. Sorry about that, Bitcoin community. I'm also just, curious as to how this market is going to react for the rest of the week. Don't forget, we also get Joe Biden's sort of exit speech tonight.
I will never forget not buying Bitcoin at $75 a pop. It's painful every time.
Matt, you would still be here with us had you.
Of course.
Had you done that?
I mean, it's only $100 grand. It's not $1 million.
I wouldn't quit my job just because I made a few $100 million.
Will get you, Yeah, 100 million. That would be fine.
There you go, closing bell, and what a rally. Not quite the level, I don't believe, that we saw in November of 2023 when the S&P was up a solid 2%. That was the last time you had such a big move up on a CPI day. But we do have a gain of 1 2/3%, almost 700 points on the Dow Jones Industrial Average, 43,214 the level there. The S&P 500 up 1.8%, more than 100 points on the day to 5950, and the NASDAQ gaining 2.5% to 19,511, Carol.
Yep, I call that a rally, no doubt about it. Hey, Matt, I'm going to go back to the S&P 500, up the most since November of 2024, so early November of last year. And if you look at the S&P 500, Vonnie, you've got most names in the index higher today, 369 names, 369 to the upside, 134 to the downside.
Yeah, it's very, very tough if you look in the map to actually find a company that's in the red. Look at that tiny, tiny little sliver up there. You're talking about a couple of consumer staple companies, but consumer discretionary sort of took the lead, right? The group as a whole was up 3%, so consumer staples, perhaps things like food and beverage and tobacco down, and just pulling that down by just 0.1%. We're really talking about green across the board here.
All right, so let's get to, I had so much to choose from.
Carol
Tim
Master,
was,
that's enough.
He was super, super jealous. A lot of names to choose from. So I kind of went to an index to kick it off, just to represent all of the big banks, because every name, 24 in the KBW Bank Index, are higher today, folks. And so the index overall up more than 4% in today's session. The 4 largest U.S. banks, as you know, reported their numbers before the open. The second most profitable year ever in 2024, driven by interest rate moves, investment banking fees, and market swings. So, you know, whether it's Goldman, whether it's Wells, whether it's Citi, helped up by news of a $20 billion buyback. All of them really just up across the board. Another name that really caught my attention, this is the number 2 gainer in the NASDAQ 100, Intuitive Surgical. This one up 7.6% here, and it may be a record close. I got to pull it up. I'm going to do that. In the meantime, this is after the company reported preliminary revenue for the fourth quarter that beat the average analyst estimate, and it is, I believe, at a record close in today's session. And then here's something a little bit different. Beacon Roofing Supply, ticker is BECN. It's a $7.3 billion market cap roofing and building materials company, rallying. This is after QXO, you know, that's the company run by Brad Jacobs, former CEO of United Rentals, United Waste. He proposed buying the company for $124.25 in change, the stock closing at $117 and change. That deal, an offer in cash, implying a total deal value of about $11 billion. So that's about a 37% premium to Beacon's 90-day average price. So this one was definitely a standout in today's session, Tim. All right. What did you find, Tim?
Yeah, not much. Well, in a market with so much buying across the board, kind of hard to find decliners, but I did it, guys. Southwest Airlines down 1 percentage point exactly. Why do you call it that, Matt?
Some say.
Well, why are they down, right? I mean, just way too many cancellations and delays.
But they could go from Southwest to Southwest very easily, right?
Maybe that is the perfect segue. The U.S. Transportation
There are any
Department.
lawyers out there watching.
The U.S. Transportation Department suing the company earlier today for allegedly violating rules that require airlines to set and meet realistic flight schedules. According to the government, the carrier was responsible for, quote, chronically delayed flights that disrupted passengers' travel plans. The Department of Transportation said it would seek maximum civil penalties. Southwest, in a statement, said it was, quote, disappointed that DOT chose to file the lawsuit over 2 flights that occurred more than 2 years ago. Still, we did see shares fall after that news broke. And Vonnie, you mentioned tobacco companies. Shares of Altria Group, ticker MO, down 0.6%. All tobacco company shares, or should say multiple shares of tobacco companies, fell after the FDA said it's pushing ahead with plans to cap nicotine levels in cigarettes. The FDA saying that it would cap nicotine levels at 0.7 milligram of nicotine per gram of tobacco. The average nicotine content in the top 100 cigarette brands for 2017 was 17.2 milligrams for each gram of tobacco.
Cigarettes.
So that's quite a difference. Well, you bring up a good point, and hence why the stock is lower. The proposed move is designed to make it easier for smokers to quit and to prevent others from starting. So do the math. If they're less addictive, if they're easier to quit, if people don't start as much, it probably means fewer cigarettes, Matt.
It's not, I mean, actually, I've been watching Landman lately.
Oh,
yeah. I have one episode left. Don't spoil it.
They must be sponsored by Marlboro. I mean, so many people smoking in that show. But in real life, I mean, people smoke weed, right? But no one smokes cigarettes anymore.
I think the rates certainly have declined in the U.S. Outside of the U.S. is still a growth area for some of these companies.
But interestingly, Tim, did you see that they have actually banned it outdoors in Milan now, which I thought was fascinating because Milan is a place where 1 in 4 smokes still. I mean, Europe is obviously much bigger of a smoking community still than the United States.
That's a really big deal.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Hey, finally, I did find one more decliner. Albertsons companies fell 1.5%. The grocery store operator, Matt, said it will implement layoffs. They said, quote, after many years of productivity efforts, we recently turned our attention to our general and administrative expenses and made the difficult decision to reduce the size of our corporate division support workforce. Shares down about 1.5%.
I just want to point out that I have had a lovely time whenever I've flown Southwest. It's just too easy.
Is that the lawyers or Southwest that call?
I have flown Southwest. You know, it's one of those planes, airlines where you hop, do the hops.
Puddle jumpers.
And you know, I've always really liked it. In terms of yields right now, we had at one point the biggest drop in 10-year yields since August. In fact, I see the 10-year yield down 14.3 basis points. We could be there with that at 4.649%. So under 465 on the 10-year. A week ago, that still felt really high, but right now it feels just relaxing. You can see the 30-year yield up down 10 basis points at 487, and the 20, which is my favorite tenor, still at 494.46.
Hey, I just want to point out, too, the market's fear gauge, the VIX, collapsing the most this year. It was down 2.6 points to 1608. So just interesting to see a huge market reset, but we certainly could get this again. Hey, folks, one story on our radar has to do with the fires out on the West Coast and the entertainment industry. Hollywood studios, Walt Disney resuming filming TV shows indoors with the exception of one series. So we're starting to see some of the activity in the entertainment industry come back on the West Coast, the LA area.
Okay, so you mentioned Walt Disney. Work on the film The Hand That Rocks the Cradle has also resumed, Walt Disney said. Last week, a number of film and television productions in LA fell by about half from a year ago, of course, due to those wildfires burning in the region. That's according to Film LA. Vonnie, those fires still not out yet.
No, and a tough road ahead, and the wind is going to be crazy this week as well. So you do like to see as many parts of the, market that can get back up on its feet and keep things kind of moving as possible. And of course, that industry is just paramount, literally, to Hollywood. The story that we were looking at is maybe a little bit less serious, although
it's serious.
Could be a Hollywood movie.
Yeah, anyone seen Jurassic Park?
Well, exactly, Tim, because apparently if this company called Colossal Biosciences is able to do it, we could actually see extinct animals like the dodo and the Tasmanian tiger, and particularly the woolly mammoth, make a comeback. Now, some scientists say, yeah, but will they be the same ones as existed hundreds and thousands of years ago, or will they be sort of weird, sort of modern incarnation of a woolly mammoth? I wouldn't want to meet one either way, honestly.
I think this is awesome, and although I have seen Jurassic Park and I understand the lessons from which we could take, I still think we should do it.
Got no DNA, so you just wait. The DNA is saved in the blood of a fly stuck in amber. Is that how it works?
Oh,
I don't know.
Goldblum.
Maybe
yes, thank you.
Maybe we should try and solve climate change first.
Still?
Saying.
In
I
Trump
think that's a good idea.
Haven't we?
Well, actually, this company is actually trying to do a little bit of that as well, though, Carol. Did you notice? Yeah, they are trying to work on some climate-related, things like plastics in the oceans and so on. So, good luck to them. At least they're ambitious.
Yeah, love to see that. That would be a very, very good thing. All right, guys, that's a wrap. Our cross-platform radio, TV, YouTube, Bloomberg Originals. We call it Closing Bell. We'll see you again, same time, same place tomorrow.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors that bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Massar and Tim Stenivek on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, no doubt about it, a top story for this Wednesday. We continue to track Israel and Hamas agreeing to a ceasefire deal that will release dozens of hostages and bring a temporary halt to the war in the Gaza Strip. that we know has killed tens of thousands of people in the region in the last 15 months. I will say it's a multi-phase deal. We're getting, or continue to get some more details, Tim, on it, and we want to get an update. Our own Ian Marlowe is out there in D.C. with the latest. He's Bloomberg News senior reporter. Ian, so we saw President Biden, heard from him. President-elect Donald Trump has weighed in. What new details are we continuing to hear about this ceasefire?
Yeah, basically that it almost didn't happen. There was a bit of a last-minute hiccup with the Israeli Prime Minister's office saying there were still some details left to figure out, but it looks like that has not stopped Qatar, which was one of the negotiators, and Biden himself from coming out and announcing the deal. So what we do know is that it will be along the shape of the deal Biden laid out last May, which has been the framework for what everyone is negotiating. That means basically 6 weeks of a ceasefire. That's set to start on Sunday. So the weapons should fall silent at that point. And then there will be a release of about 33 Israeli hostages, including some Americans, although it's not clear how many. And that will be in exchange for hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. And that will then allow aid trucks, hundreds of aid trucks to come in each day for the Palestinians who have been hard hit by this conflict, the civilians there in Gaza. So that's what we know so far. I think the reaction so far from regional experts is obviously this is a welcome development, but there's still a lot of ways this could come apart. And I think there's just a bit of a cautious optimism here, given the amount of things that could go wrong when you're dealing with, a terrorist group on one side and a very sensitive situation with Israel and, in the shadow of October 7th on the other side.
Well, notably, it also comes at a time where the U.S. is undergoing its own transition when it comes to presidential administrations, with President-elect Donald Trump set to take office on Monday. How does that complicate things?
Yeah, it's been a big factor in this negotiation. Obviously, both sides right now are taking credit. Biden was asked at the end of his comments, does Trump deserve credit or do you? And he turned around and said, is that a joke? And then kind of drifted off. But, Trump is out, claiming credit for this. Some people are saying it's the looming, Trump unpredictability that sort of forced, people's hands on this deal and led to it. And Trump's envoy for the Middle East, the real estate investor, Steve Witkoff, has been participating with some of the Biden administration officials in these negotiations. We've basically been told he's really kind of hammered this January 20th inauguration day sort of deadline, like we want this deal by this point, or things could go bad for everyone. So that's been a really interesting factor, and it has also been true that even though this deal has come together in the last few days of the Biden administration, most of it will be implemented during the Trump administration. So there will be a transition, a handover of power at the State Department, at the National Security Council, the White House. All sorts of people kind of leaving their old jobs, and so hopefully that doesn't disrupt any of the flow of how this is going to go on. And they said they involved some of the Trump team in order to try and make up for that.
Yeah, certainly tricky, right, in terms of the handoff and seeing it to fruition. Ian, thank you so much. Bloomberg News senior reporter Ian Marlowe joining us there from D.C.
Well, earlier today I did a live Q&A for Bloomberg subscribers about the devastating wildfires in L.A. First and foremost, our thoughts and hearts are with everybody who's been affected by this ongoing disaster. The focus of our conversation, though, specifically on the impact on insurance and whether or not climate disasters will topple insurance markets. One thing we didn't discuss, though, was how much these homeowners who've lost everything are actually going to get from their insurance companies. And it is the topic of the most recent column from Mark Gongloff, who covers climate change for Bloomberg Opinion. He joins us from New York. Mark, as often is the case when you join us, the news is not great. In this case, you call it the $2 trillion housing market nightmare worsening. What's the expectation versus reality when it comes to redemptions from insurance companies?
Unfortunately, the reality is kind of harsh for a lot of people. Insurance policies aren't necessarily going to pay you for the full amount that you might expect for your house to replace your house, and it may take a long time to get that money. There are people who in California who bought these houses years ago, and a lot of their wealth, these houses were sort of going to be their retirement plans. Maybe their houses had doubled or tripled in value. They burned to the ground. You go to your insurance company, say, I want to build this back up. What you get is not going to be anything like what it was. You're not going to get a $3.5 million house if that's what you had before, and might take you many months to get any house at all. And again, part of the big angle of my column was that when we talk about the $2 trillion, this isn't just a California problem. This is a problem around the country.
Mark, one thing I think about is, as you say, it's across the country. I keep thinking about like the great financial crisis and the housing mess. And I do wonder that if these homes, properties are marked down, there's still mortgages and there's banks who hold those mortgages, but that the house values aren't there. Like, where do things start to fall apart? And is there the makings of potentially another financial crisis here? Not to mention the personal crisis.
Yeah. That's the big fear here. We had 2 congressional hearings about this last month with the Senate Budget Committee and the Joint Economic Committee. They both produced reports about the growing insurance crisis. I don't know yet. I mean, having lived through the financial crisis, lived through the run-up with the subprime mortgages and everything, I don't know if we're yet at a stage where we can say, okay, next year it's all going to go kablooey and all these mortgages are going to go bad. What looks very likely, though, is that you will have many financial crises, at least for a while. California may be having one of those right now, where all of a sudden all these people wake up and realize they don't have their houses aren't worth what they thought they were. But there are many parallels with the 2008 crisis. In fact, this guy Dave Burt, who got a cameo role in Michael Lewis's The Big Short, because he was one of the people who spotted the subprime mortgage crisis and made some money off of it. He now has a new company that is doing research on a new potential housing crisis based on climate, based on underinsurance. And this is where this $2 trillion number comes from. Last year, I wrote a piece about how he thought there was a $1.2 trillion gap between what the market says our houses are worth and what they may really be worth if they flood or catch fire. He has since updated that because those were old numbers, and he has updated that for a huge pandemic run-up in places on the coast and places in the forest where everybody fled the cities to go buy these houses in these scenic places, and then, oops, they could be hit by a hurricane or they could catch on fire. And so, but those houses boomed in value, but they are also at high risk of climate-related losses. And so now that's up to $1.7 trillion in the best-case scenario.
That's real money. And then you and I keep talking about the insurance costs. Like at some point, like who's going to be taking, if insurers don't want to insure, I don't know.
And if the FAIR plan runs out of money and they have to do an assessment
Well, it all falls, as with the subprime mortgage crisis, it eventually falls on the taxpayer.
Right.
In California's case, if the FAIR plan runs out of money, it will fall on the insurance payers there. It will be spread evenly.
Mark, we gotta run. Mark Gungloff, a must-read always. Mark, thank you.
It's 421 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Wall Street has its best CPI days since late 2023. This update brought to you by Oracle. Attention, growing businesses. Oracle's offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. For new U.S. customers with minimal financial commitment, offer ends March 31st. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/Bloomberg. The Dow rallied 703 points today, up by about 1.6%. S&P up 1.8%. NASDAQ did even better, up today by 2.5%. Russell 2000 index of small cap shares rallied 2%. 10-year 4.65%. Gold up 0.7%. 26.95 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude 80.45 a barrel, up by 3.8%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. And that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Hey, thanks for that update, Charlie. Do appreciate it. Well, as all of you know, Monday is Martin Luther King Jr. Day, a federal holiday that celebrates the life and legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. Over the next half hour, we're going to talk about race relations in America, including with the author of How We Heal, A Journey Toward Truth, Racial Healing, and Community Transformation from the Inside Out. It's written by the first female and first African-American leader of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. That conversation a little later on.
Right. And just a reminder, of course, Martin Luther King Day also happens to fall on January 20th, which is the day that President-elect Donald Trump will be inaugurated this Monday. Tim and I will be doing a special edition of Bloomberg Business Week that afternoon, looking at the new incoming administration and all the policies that may come down. So we want to get into that and more with our next guest, who has a certain very personal story and attachment, of course, to Martin Luther King Day. We are joined by Reverend Dr. Bernice King. She's the Chief Executive Officer of the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change, which is also known as the King Center. She is the daughter of Martin Luther King Jr. and her mom, Coretta Scott King, founder of the King Center. Dr. King, so nice to have you here with us. You know, Monday for many, it's a holiday. Well, nice to have you here. For many more, it's also a reminder of our difficult past around race relations and discrimination. What does the day mean to you, honoring your dad?
Well, it's an opportunity, obviously, for us to not just commemorate his life, but to really look further into his teachings. He was not just a civil rights leader, he was a teacher. He left us a blueprint as to how to create a just, humane, equitable, and peaceful world. And every year, one of the things that I encourage is that we study him more, because he spoke about things that we as a nation and world needed to do to fight against what he saw as the triple evils of poverty, racism, and militarism as a threat to our humanity. And so here we are once again this year, and as we inaugurate a new president, those teachings don't change. They stay the same. What we have to do is to connect to them and to connect to the spirit of that movement so we can continue to move our nation and world forward.
I was going to ask you, just to follow up, you said, you know, your dad leaving us a blueprint. How would you think he's doing, how we are doing today with that blueprint?
Well, you know, he said to us in Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos of Community in 1967, the book that he published then, that we must find a way to live together as brothers, and he meant humanity as brothers and sisters, or together we would be forced to perish as fools. And I think we've not found the way to do that. I think we further divided around different ideologies instead of trying to spend time learning, in spite of our differences, how do we live together? How do we create a coexistence where we don't co-annihilate one another? You know, how do we create a world where everyone has decent and affordable housing and access to health care? You know, how do we ensure that people who may end up in the homeless population, how do we ensure that that is short-lived and we create a pathway to people to to reclaim their lives? How do we create a fair distribution of wealth in this nation? He talked about having a radical redistribution of wealth. He didn't talk about it in the sense that we just have to remove wealth from someone else, but we have to figure out how do we balance our economy so that people can have enough to do well. And then, of course, he talked about how do we respect who we are from the different cultures and different backgrounds. We'll never all agree on everything. We'll never all like each other. We'll never all think alike, but we certainly can spend time learning how to live together. So that takes a lot of listening, curiosity. It takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of humility. It takes compassion. These are all the things that he taught us through the spirit and the heart of nonviolence that he led that movement in.
Well, it's that last point that I want to talk about, Dr. King, because we've been talking about over the last few months the dismantling of DEI programs at many companies. If I just look at the stories that one of our reporters, Jeff Green, has written in recent months, here are some headlines. Walmart under fire from investors for cutting DEI programs. Meta retreats from diversity and inclusion, appeasing Trump. Amazon is halting some of its diversity and inclusion programs. McDonald's walks back DEI goals in latest corporate retreat. Other companies, including Deere and more.
And we've talked about corporate America, did hire more black workers for a while, and then it stopped.
How do you, in an environment such as this, where things seem to not necessarily be going in that direction, how do you have optimism?
Well, I always have optimism because there are always people, like Target and Costco and others who choose to follow the pathway that we all know is for the best of our nation and our world. Look, if we don't have an inclusive economy as a nation, then we're not going to survive in the global economy. And so I think there are going to be some hard realities we're going to be faced with in a few years if what those who have sought to remove DEI have done, it's going to show certain results. I think it's up to certain courageous leaders to combine forces and stand against this. It really, at the end of the day, it's really not about the language anyway. It's about who we are as a people. Do we have a love-centered way of leading our cultures in corporate America, in our educational institutions? When we look around at our different cultures, do we have everyone that's needed in terms of representation at the table? Whether you call it DEI, you call it representation, or you call it a belonging culture, or for us, the beloved community. How do we create beloved community cultures? Because at the end of the day, it's about the outcomes. So if they remove the names, they remove what they call DEI, but then they are still committed to getting to certain outcomes, then maybe there's no problem. But if removing it also means that we're not going to ensure that we have cultures that reflect who we are as a nation and even as a world, then it just means those of us who practice nonviolence are going to have to organize and strategize and come up with plans to put pressure where it's needed.
Dr. King, what do you think white Americans still don't understand about Black America today, and what do you believe it will take to achieve true racial equality?
Well, the first thing is Black America is not trying to take anything from anybody. I think that's the first thing people need to understand. There's this threat, if Black America were in charge, they will remove us and nothing could be further from the truth. If you study the history of our race, we've always been holistically. It doesn't mean there aren't exceptions in every racial grouping. But if you study as a whole, we're very forgiving people. We are a very inclusive culture. We tend to stand, with what is right and what is fair and what is just. And I think there's a misnomer that if we are in these roles, we may do what others do. I think there's a misnomer as to who we are, that, we just get jobs or we get opportunities just because we're Black. No, we're very qualified. If you spend any time on social media, you'll see the number of young children out of the Black community who are finishing college and getting PhD degrees when they're they're not even 15 yet. They're not even 14
Right.
yet. So we have a very intelligent, a very skilled community, and it doesn't take anything away from anybody else's community who has intelligent and skilled individuals. And so the biggest thing, Daddy said something that was very powerful. He said, people hate each other because they don't know each other. They don't know each other because they don't communicate with each other. They don't communicate with each other because they're separated from each other. And so as long as we keep division and separation, then the myths can continue to be the truth. So we have to find a way, as I said, to learn to live together and cross some of these boundaries and not allow whatever every other commentary may say about, any community to rule the day. I need to come and connect with you. I need to learn more about you. I need to spend time with you. I need to experience your culture. It doesn't mean I may embrace all of it, but I'll have a greater understanding of it. And I think that's what a love-centered person, a compassionate person, a curious person would do, and a person, more importantly, who wants to see a better world.
Well, we think about it. We've only got about a couple of minutes left here, but we are thinking about Martin Luther King Day on Inauguration Day, incoming President Donald Trump, and what his administration might bring in terms of policies and what it means for Black Americans and equality in the United States. We kind of get the sense that your dad, tried to engage power to influence change. He seemed very pragmatic and yet took those risks.
Yes.
Do you think your father would try to engage with the conservative right, to get them to better understand the implications of their positions, or is that not even possible? And again, only about a minute and a half here.
Oh, it's always possible. Nonviolence believes in the possibility. Nonviolence actually can help overcome what seems to be impossible. So through strategy and plan, when he went to see Johnson, and Johnson said, look, I've done as much as I can with civil rights right now. I can't get the votes on voting rights. Daddy went back and said, well, we're going to have to get him some power. We're going to have to help him figure that out. So in this administration, we got to figure out where are the connection points. Who are the people in the administration we might be able to have access to who may understand, that can then translate the message. It's about strategy, and nonviolence helps you with that.
Do you have faith in the Trump administration helping out the Black community?
I have faith in God, and I believe in the power of a collective conscience that is committed to freedom, justice, and equality. And I believe it is possible. That's why our theme is, Mission Possible, protecting freedom, justice, and equality. Freedom, justice, and democracy through the spirit of Nonviolence 365, which is Kingian nonviolence, is taught and demonstrated by my father. That's what I have faith in.
Dr. King, just 25 seconds left here. What do you hope every American kind of thinks about when it comes to our country here?
I want them to remember that as a humanity, we have been to these places before. Maybe not literally us, but human beings have been in difficult, challenging times. We come from those individuals, and we too have the capacity to rise to the occasion and meet the challenges and move our nation and world forward.
Thank you so much for finding time for us. Our thoughts with you, certainly, as we prepare for the holiday and to mark his memory and his legacy on Monday. That is Reverend Dr. Bernice King, Chief Executive Officer of the King Center, joining us from Atlanta on this Wednesday. This is Bloomberg.
It's 4:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We begin with a developing story. President-elect Donald Trump is said to be considering an executive order to save TikTok from that ban. That, according to the Washington Post. Also, founder Nate Anderson has decided to disband the short seller research firm Hindenburg Research. That headline on the Bloomberg Professional Service. An update, stocks ripped higher after this morning's CPI report. Better than expected bank earnings as well. S&P up 107, ending the session at 59.49, up 1.8%. The Dow up 703, up 1.7%. NASDAQ up 466. That was a gain of 2.5%. 10-year, 4.66%. The 2-year, 4.26%. Gold up $17 the ounce, up 0.6%. West Texas Intermediate crude, 80.43 a barrel, up today by just about 3.8%. As for today's CPI report and where it leaves the Federal Reserve, Lauren Sadell Baker is an economist at IT Economics. That is the Institute for Trend Research.
The big drivers here, things like airfare, medical care, those are things that we know do cost more, so no big surprises, especially on the core front. I think this is a manageable result, and I think this, again, keeps the Fed on pace for those 50 basis points of cuts this year.
Lauren Seidel Baker of ITR Economics. Bank stocks higher. S&P, as I mentioned, up 1.8%. The JP Morgan Chase shares up 2%. Citigroup up 6.5%. Wells Fargo today up 6.7%. And Goldman Sachs after earnings up by 6%. Next up, Morgan Stanley and Bank of America. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much for that update, Charlie Pellet. As we mentioned earlier, we're spending a good portion of the final hour of our show focused on race relations and race in America ahead of the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday on Monday. We just spoke to Reverend Dr. Bernice King, the CEO of the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change, also known as the King Center.
Right. And LaJune Montgomery Tabron is the first female and first African-American leader of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. It's one of the largest philanthropic institutions in the United States. She's also the author of a new book, How We Heal, A Journey Toward Truth, Racial Healing, and Community Transformation from the Inside Out. And we really want to start at the beginning of the book. LaJune, welcome, welcome. Nice to have you here with Tim and myself. You know, it's so wild to be coming off of a conversation with Dr. Bernice King, and then to see how you start your book. Take us back. The Sunday in late June of 1963, you were 8 months old.
Absolutely, and it's reflecting on the speech that Dr. King gave, the speech that actually was the preface to his I Had a Dream speech. And I reflect on how important that speech was actually first given in Detroit, where I was born, and was the beginning of my own healing journey in America, which is the story, part of the story of the book that we have launched.
So a lot happened between then and you becoming the 9th president and CEO of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. It is one of the largest philanthropic institutions in the U.S. How do you draw that line, though? And you do it in the book. How do you draw that line from that moment when you were an infant to this point in your career?
Yeah, and it's a journey that I've been on, a personal healing journey. It's the journey our nation has been on, and it's the journey that I have led at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. We've seen results coming out of the civil rights movement and the leadership of Dr. Martin Luther King. We've continued to grapple with the issue of race in America. Our work at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation has been about how to address racism head on and to begin to dismantle those systems that disadvantage children. Our work is about improving the lives of all children in America, and I am one of those children. And the story in the book is about how my journey encountered racism but how it strengthened me and how I learned to heal from those encounters, and how I then carried that into my work at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, and how we know it is the work for the future of this nation if we are going to connect people across our differences.
Lejeune, how can we though see more of your stories? And I think it's fair to say, the Bloomberg News team talked about how corporate America was hiring more black workers coming off of George Floyd, coming off of the pandemic, and then it stopped. And how do we ensure that the trend continues in terms of your own story of where you started and where you are today, that even though you faced challenges, had to deal with obstacles and faced racism, how do we, first of all, get rid of it in the country, but help others to be able to face it and achieve so much more?
Sure, and we work with corporate America in a body of work that we have called Expanding Equity. And what I know from that work is that companies are not retreating in this space. They understand the business case of diversity. They know that their companies are better off with diverse talent and perspectives. And what I've learned working with these companies is that they see how they are higher performers as a result of their diversity, and they're continuing to make sure that they have that. It is a business imperative for them. So that is the work of our nation, is to make sure that everyone is engaged in our economy, and the numbers show that. We conducted a study that indicates we could unleash an additional $8 trillion in economic growth in GDP by 2050 if we were just to make sure that all of our human capital was properly utilized.
Are you?
So we know
I just want to jump in because we only have a couple of minutes left, and I want to make sure I get your thoughts on this because it's in the news day in, day out. But Walmart cut its DEI programs. McDonald's walked back DEI. You have Meta retreating from DEI, Amazon halting some of its DEI programs. These are just headlines from the last couple of weeks. Are companies?
Yeah, I've seen
what happens?
those headlines.
How do you feel about them? How do you think can we still do? Does it set us back? Do we still tap into that human capital if we're not conscious of this stuff?
I think it's a headline. I think we have to really understand what that means. In many cases, what every company knows is that they have to compete for talent. They have to continue to build and grow talent. And you're not going to do that if you're not fully accessing our human capital. So the naming may change. The understanding that this is a business imperative and we all must have the best talent is not going away.
So even though we see these headlines, you think corporate America, certainly the big companies, the publicly held companies where we're seeing these headlines, you say that you believe that they're still committed to DEI efforts?
Absolutely, yes.
All right, go ahead, Tim.
Well, we have 30 seconds left. Then why be so public about moving away from them?
I think in this world today, the need for healing is imperative. And that's why we wrote the book and issued it in this moment. The narrative in this nation is divisive, and it's forcing people to choose positions. Healing is about connections. Healing is about bringing people together across their differences. And that is the work of the nation for the future. And that is what we know people want to do.
Well, that I like ending on that optimistic note. Lejeune, thank you so much. Lejeune Montgomery Tabron, President and CEO of the Kellogg Foundation, the new book, How We Heal. This is Bloomberg.
listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Nasser and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
All right, everybody, getting ready to wrap up on this Wednesday edition of Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Nasser along with Tim Stenovec. And gotta say, this is an interesting story. It has to do with short seller Nate Anderson of Hindenburg Research shutting down his firm. I gotta say, safe to say, it's coming out as a surprise.
Yeah, he's got a huge long note worth a read on his website. It's hindenburgresearch.com/gratitude. Partly what he writes is, quote, "The plan has been to wind up after we finish the pipeline of ideas we were working on, and as the last Ponzi cases we just completed and are sharing with regulators, that day is today."
Yeah, he says, "I write this from a place of joy. Building this has been a life stream. I did not know at the outset if it would be possible to find a fulfilling path. This wasn't an easy option," he goes on to say, "but I was naive to the danger and felt drawn to it magnetically."
Yeah, this was, I didn't know this about him, but
Yeah.
this is a big part of the letter that he writes. He says, "When I started this, I doubted I was capable. I didn't have a traditional finance background. None of my relatives are in this field. I went to a state school. I'm not a slick salesperson. I don't know any of the right clothes to wear. I can't play golf. I'm not some superhuman that can function on 4 hours of sleep." He goes on to say that he had a newborn child. He was facing eviction at the time, terrified. He knew that if he stayed, he would crumble. The only option he had was to keep moving forward, and that's what he did.
Yeah, he actually did an interview with the Wall Street Journal, and they've got it right through. He is, of course, the short seller who wiped billions of dollars off the market value of companies, including Nikola and Icon Enterprises, shutting down his firm. He cited the toll that the work took on his well-being. In that interview with the Wall Street Journal, he said, "I've spent most of the last 8 years either in a fight or preparing for the next one." He said he felt that he and Hindenburg had accomplished what they had set out to do, showing it was possible to build a business from hunting fraud and other issues in public and private markets. He hopes to soon share resources and training materials so others can use Hindenburg's tactics in their own investigations. A lot of this is really all in that letter, but it's also, just to be fully transparent, reading this also from the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah,
story.
in the letter, he talks about how over the years he's gotten so many letters from people, messages asking how they can do their own investigations. So that's why he plans to come out with
like a primer
some
on, right, how they
materials
did it.
on how to do this. The question is, how much money did he make doing something like this? The Wall Street Journal notes that he earned enough money to provide for his family into the future, and he plans to invest his money in index funds and other low-stress investments.
Well, listen.
Do you think he can stick to that? Like, he's been, for the last 8 years,
I'm just going to buy the market.
for the last 8 years, he's been, so focused on these deep investigations into companies. Like, how do you then just turn that off and throw your money in index funds?
So maybe he does an ETF that's like, a double leverage bet, on the downside of something. Like maybe that's how he gets into it. We should point out, and this is something Tim and I, when we saw this headline, we're like, okay, maybe some of it has to do with the market environment. It's been not easy to be a short seller.
But he's able to move stock prices very quickly.
Absolutely. The Journal pointing out prominent short sellers have retreated in recent years. Online armies of individual traders targeted those who bet against the rapid rise in GameStop shares, including now defunct Melvin Capital, which lost $1 billion in a single day. And then you've got short seller Andrew Left, was indicted last year on allegations he manipulated stock prices. He has pleaded not guilty. And we talk about something, like Jim Chanos, who legendary, iconic in the world of short sellers. His short of Enron became legendary. He closed his once $6 billion fund back in 2023. Again, I'm reading the specifics from the Wall Street Journal story, but this is something we've talked about, kind of, I hate to say the demise of the short seller, but it's not been easy to be one.
They struck gold when they shorted Nikola. In 2023, the firm scraped, this is from the Wall Street Journal, the firm scraped the entire corporate registry of the island of Mauritius to find companies that it alleged were used by India's Adani family, at the time one of the world's richest. And then remember what happened with Carl Icahn. He had to renegotiate billions of dollars in loans he had taken against the stock when its price crashed after Hindenburg alleged it was overvaluing assets and was over-leveraged. Again, reading this from the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, and again, I think it speaks a little bit to this environment. I think probably being this, when you often come out with a report, you are a target and people can question your research, and so you've got to be super meticulous and be able to justify it. Not all of Hindenburg's shorts or ideas or picks have been winners. As the Journal points out, since publishing a report about children's game platform Roblox last October, company shares are up roughly 50%. The company added parental controls that address many of the allegations in Hindenburg's report, and his work, as the Journal reminds us, was followed very closely by regulators and law enforcement. So, maybe good in that they were looking for problems, but it also was a reminder that their work was very, very closely followed.
There's an About Us section on Hindenburg's website that talks about its track record. It goes back to, it has a timeline that goes back to 2014 all the way up to October of 2024. And then there's a section, Carol, at the bottom. Why Hindenburg? Here's what he writes, quote, "We find the Hindenburg is the epitome of a totally man-made, totally avoidable disaster. Over 100 people were loaded into a balloon filled with the most flammable element in the universe, despite dozens of earlier hydrogen-based aircraft meeting with similar fates. Nonetheless,